Hey everybody, my name is Josh Harris, and I will be doing a presentation on firewalls, since they are such a widely used and prevalent tool in preventing unauthorized access or malware, anything like that, on personal computers and in businesses. So for what I'll be going over today, I'll be going over what a firewall is, just sort of like the general definition, and most people pretty much know what it is, but kind of just the technical term and how long it's been around and stuff like that. And then for the history, I'll be going over the different generations, as they call them, and sort of like how it's evolved over the years. And then I'll go over the types of firewalls, which there are about 5 or 6 of, but we'll get into that. And then we'll go over the difference between a software firewall and a hardware firewall, because software is used primarily for like individual and home PCs, and hardware is used for businesses usually and stuff like that, but we'll get into that. So starting with what is a firewall? A firewall can be hardware, software, or both, and it is a network security device that monitors incoming and outgoing network traffic and decides whether to allow or block specific traffic based on a defined set of security rules. Firewalls have been a first line of defense in network security for over 25 years. They establish a barrier between secured and controlled internal networks that can be trusted and untrusted outside networks such as the internet. So, basically it's just a line of defense between the internet and your computer. It just stops anything harmful from getting in based off what it deems to be harmful. So the history, the first generation of firewalls are called packet filters, and they inspect packets transferred between computers and discards packets that don't meet the filtering rules. So very basic, and at like the surface level, they just literally receive a packet, see if it meets the rules, and don't think anything else about it. If it does not meet it, they drop it. If it does, they let it through. That's it. But for the second generation, stateful filters, which are also known as circuit level gateways, are sort of a more advanced version of this basically, and they operate up to the transport layer of the OSI model, since it retains packets long enough to make a judgment about its state. So instead of just looking at the filtering rules and then immediately dropping it if it doesn't meet them, it actually has extra criteria to see if it's still worth letting through, based off kind of context a little bit. The only downside is that it's vulnerable to denial of service attacks that bombard the firewall with fake connections to overwhelm the connection state memory, which is a bit of a downside. The third generation of firewalls is application layer filters. So these understand certain applications and protocols, which the previous two do not, such as FTP, DNS, or HTTP, so that it can detect if an unwanted application or service is attempting to bypass the firewall using a protocol on an allowed port, or detect if a protocol is being abused in a harmful way. So sort of like the more modern one, where it checks if you have an open port, and if you have an application trying to use it, it basically just checks if it has a protocol that it recognizes, and then sees if it's harmful in any way. Then for the modern generation, which is the newer generation of firewalls, they simply extend the application layer filtering by having intrusion prevention systems, or otherwise known as IPS, and user identity management integration, which binds user IDs to IP or MAC addresses, which basically just adds like another layer of security and kind of checks for authenticity. So then we're going to go over the types of firewalls, which there is proxy stateful inspection, unified threat management or UTM, next generation firewalls or NGFW, and threat focused next generation firewalls. So for the proxy firewall, it's an early type of firewall device. A proxy firewall serves as the gateway from one network to another for a specific application. Proxy servers can provide additional functionality such as content caching and security by preventing direct connections from outside the network. However, this also may impact throughput capabilities in the applications they can support. So, pretty basic. You can see in the picture here on the right that it's basically a proxy is just a extra security measure that all the devices connect to, and then from the proxy it accesses the firewall and accesses the internet. So it's basically just a way that it's just a gateway from that has all devices on one network and then has the firewall that connects to the exterior network, which is the internet. So for state inspection firewall, thought of as a traditional firewall, a stateful inspection firewall allows or blocks traffic based on state, port, and protocol. It monitors all activity from the opening of a connection until it is closed. And filtering decisions are made based on both administrator-defined rules as well as context, which refers to using information from previous connections and packets belonging to the same connection. So in this example here, we'll go like 1 through 7 counterclockwise. So at 1, the client is sending a packet through to the firewall. The firewall at 2 then checks the firewall rule set to see if it matches. And then it checks the dynamic state table at 3 at the top, and then it sends it to the web server by allowing it through. Then the web server sends the return message in 5 back to the firewall, and then it checks the dynamic state table at 6, but it doesn't have to check the rule set again because of context, because it's a previous connection. And then it sends it back to the client at 7. So for unified threat management, a UTM device typically combines, in a loosely coupled way, the functions of a stateful inspection firewall with intrusion prevention and antivirus. It may also include additional services and often cloud management. UTMs focus on simplicity and ease of use. So as you can see kind of in this picture, is that all of these different devices, these different these different services and devices are all connected to one device, which is the UTM in the center. So there's like the firewall, the anti-spam filtering, the IPS, bandwidth management, web security, routing capabilities, anti-spyware VPN, all that is connected to just the UTM, which is where the ease of use and simplicity comes from. And since all of it is just on one tiny device, and it has the stateful inspection firewall within it with the intrusion prevention and antivirus, that's basically like why it's so easy to use, because all of it's just ran through one thing. For the next generation firewall, most companies are deploying next generation firewalls to block modern threats such as advanced malware and application layer attacks. A next generation firewall generally includes standard firewall capabilities like stateful inspection, integrated intrusion prevention, application awareness and control to see and block potentially risky apps, upgrade paths to include future information feeds, and techniques to address evolving security threats, which is the obvious big one considering that's constantly evolving. As you can see, as this example here, which is just a basic firewall nowadays, is that there's a bunch of apps on the left side here that a lot of them use port 80. And they are ingress to the, in this example, the Barracuda next generation firewall. And then there, based on what it defines as critical, acceptable, and unacceptable applications, it sorts them to be either dropped or put through the egress. So in this example, the critical apps are like Oracle and VoIP that have prioritized bandwidth. And then Sling, YouTube, Pandora, Facebook, all those are accepted and have managed bandwidth. And then it decided LimeWire, BitTorrent, and World of Warcraft for some reason are unacceptable and blocked them. Either maybe it detected malware or just found them to be too risky to allow through. So for threat-focused next-generation firewalls, these firewalls include all the capabilities of the previously mentioned next-generation firewall, as well as provide advanced threat detection and remediation. So a threat-focused next-generation firewall can know which assets are most at risk with the following features: complete context awareness, quickly react to attacks with intelligent security automation that sets policies and hardens your defenses dynamically, better detect evasive or suspicious activity with network and endpoint event correlation, greatly decrease the time from detection to cleanup with retrospective security that continuously monitors for suspicious activity and behavior even after initial inspection, and ease administration and reduce complexity with the unified policies that protect across the entire attack continuum, which is what is referred to in this picture here. The downside is that if a threat is missed, then they become less effective in dealing with it. So basically, the one downside to this over the just the traditional next generation firewall is that these are better at detecting a threat before it becomes an issue. But if it does get through, or it's it kind of slips through the cracks and isn't seen as a risk initially, then it's harder to correct. So in this picture, it says they protect before an attack, but are less effective during or after one, which is just one downside to this. So for software versus hardware, as I previously mentioned at the beginning, software is primarily used for individual PCs. And most people have this kind of thing, like they use Windows Defender, which is just the built-in one for Windows OS, or they have McAfee or something like that. So this is the most common type of firewall, as they are not only cheaper but also easier to install. However, they have some disadvantages. For example, they use a large amount of system resources and sometimes do not run correctly. They can also cause compatibility problems with other types of software installed on the computer, which is a frequent issue that I've had in the past when I used to use third-party firewalls. Modern operating systems like Windows and Linux incorporate basic firewall solutions like Windows Defender, like I just mentioned. In some cases, like freeware firewalls, they are very powerful and flexible but require in-depth knowledge of networks and the ports used by these applications. But that's gotten a little bit better in the modern day. They're a little bit more user-friendly. To simplify configuration, however, they usually have web interfaces that make it easier for users to manage them, although this can result in reduced functionality. So basically, software firewalls are generally meant for individual PCs, but they're easy to install because you just sort of follow on-screen commands and such. And you are the system administrator, so you can monitor the flow or traffic coming into and out of whatever system you're using. And the good thing is that they're continually updating the software in the background. So it's sort of just like something that kind of handles itself. But the downside is that if you're wanting to protect your whole network, which you really won't do like on your individual home PC because you don't have enough devices for something like that, it can't really protect your whole network by itself. So that's usually why you have to go to a hardware firewall if you're running a small business or even a medium-sized business, because it's more suited to preventing or protecting the entire network that your business uses. So for hardware firewalls, they're used more in companies and large corporations. These devices are usually placed between the router and the internet connection, as they are dedicated security devices. They are optimized to carry out firewall functions and do not use up resources on personal computers, which is a bonus. Their biggest drawback, however, is maintenance, since they are difficult to update and configure correctly. So, kind of just as I went over, they're a richer set of security capabilities than software firewalls alone, just because they're more geared towards protecting an entire network rather than just a single computer, because they can monitor network traffic for activity, whether it be malicious or legitimate, and it can reject malicious activities in a grander scale. And so the kind of difference is, since it is a hardware firewall, it sort of acts as like a checkpoint, and it can quickly inspect and act on data that goes in and out of the network. So in conclusion, basically we just sort of went over what the general definition of a firewall is and kind of the different generations of it and how it's evolved and become more complex, and the different types from proxy to new or next generation firewall and how it's kind of changed. And so it used to be just like a simple system of, a packet would come in. If it didn't make the set, you drop it. But now it's evolved into a much more complex system where it chooses it based on protocol and port and context and everything like that. And then we also went over what the uses of a software firewall is for, which is individual PCs and generally what most people use at their home. And then hardware is primarily used for businesses and on a bigger scale to protect the whole network. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.